Hello, everybody, and welcome to another saucy sauce, or sauce of the sauce, as some would say. And today we have a guest all the way from the north west of England. Leanne, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Graham. Thank you.
Good. You've got a lovely background there. Is this your home you're in?
Yes, this is my home. I am speaking to you from my dining table today.
Oh, I love that. You know, good dining room table working. Is that where you generally work? You got a little office at home, or?
Yeah, I've got an office at home, but I really like sitting here because I get the view of the garden, which I don't have in the office. So 9 times out of 10, I'm here anyway.
And the sun's coming out now, you see, in the last few days. If you're listening to this, you know, at a different time of year, and it's cold and blistery and horrible outside, when we recorded this, there was actually sun in the sky. Well, it certainly is here. So there we go. So let's start with this. Marianne, how did you meet Leanne?
A few minutes ago. No, so I wanted to get into the security world, if you want to call it that, security sector. Obviously with my training, program writing, and I trained some people that worked for CCTV sector. So I trained their engineers, because they would be working with people, teaching them how to use their systems. But then I sort of realised that the security sector is massive. There's lots of different areas of it. I mean, even the other day I was called out by somebody because, with all due respect, I was told, and I thought that's never going to end well when someone says that to you. With all due respect, what would you know? And I said, well, I don't actually think I ended up finishing my comment, but what I do know is that I know what I know, and actually worlds can collide, you know, because if you bring one sort of skills into another sector, sometimes that can be a really good thing, because you bring a new set of eyes and different ways of doing things. So I was added to a group, Women in Security group, which is really, really good, because I think, Leanne, you were saying that you'd worked for bigger businesses, and now you're on your own. And I think one of the biggest problems, and some of the reasons we talked about, which we'll talk about in a minute, when you've got children and you're working by yourself, you don't get a chance to meet other people. And I don't just mean like in the physical sense, and I don't just mean in terms of like, oh, I need some company. I mean, because I quite like being on my own, but I mean in the sense of getting business, because we all know that a lot of business happens when you're around other businesses. So when you're on your own, I don't know if you found it, Leanne, it's really hard, you know. And then people say, well, get your clients to talk about you, and I'm like, that's great if you're really established, but when you're not, you really do need those other people to be shouting about what you do. Because I know for me, when I have conversations about what I do, people go, okay, now I fully understand. And then they will then say, well, actually, I know somebody that needs what you do. So let's just say I do program writing, but also I do safeguarding training. I also do neurodiversity training. So then somebody said, oh, I've got frontline staff that I want trained on neurodiversity so that they can understand their colleagues better and the public. So for me, being in that group is really, really good. So I just put a word out there, and then Leanne came back to me and I said, would you like to talk about what you do?
Oh, that's lovely. And now's your opportunity to tell everybody what you do.
No pressure.
So yes, Marianne and I met in the Women in Security network, and as you've put, really lovely, you know, it's a great group for, there's lots of synergy between different industries. Security as an umbrella term, massively varied and different specialisms within the world. So, you know, what you do, Marianne, sits really nicely within that sector, and I'm glad that you're a part of the network. I've worked in the security industry now for over 15 years. So I spent most of that time working for the largest security company in the UK, and had many hats in that organisation, mainly operationally and within strategy and account management. And I then moved into the technical arm of that department. So different set of skills needed, different different expertise in different sector, but the challenges were the same, people, the psychology, the human behaviour. I love all of that stuff anyway. And sadly, I was made redundant from that role. However, I had qualified in coaching about 6 years before that. So I decided to set up as a life and leadership coach. And it started off really being aimed at women in a male-dominated sector. And that's how it started. But what evolved was that I found more and more male clients were coming to apply to work with me. And simply because they were reaching a point in their career where they were hitting a level where they just needed some extra support with being understood within their role, questioning decisions, full of ambition, but didn't really also want to ask for help at the same time, for peer to peer. And I think men and women are very different like that. So women will discuss all the challenges. They'll quite proudly announce all of their shortcomings and failures. Men don't really do that. So to create a space for men where they felt seen and understood and heard, and actually challenged and supported to achieve their goals has been something that I've welcomed it. I've loved working with men. So that's kind of what I do now. So it's a bit of a mixture. I work the whole spectrum from therapy through to strategy. So I call myself a coach. A therapeutic coach, but I'll do anything with a client that they need at that time, because I think we need to look at the whole person and have that holistic element. And a lot of the time it is providing that structure, support and challenge to get them to their next level, or for them to find what their version of success looks like as well, because outside of the whole male and female thing, we get to a point in our lives age-wise where we get to, I don't know, maybe we get to the top of the ladder, maybe we get a certain way up and then say, well, actually, what's all this for? Why am I doing this? Do I actually want to do this? You've got caring responsibilities, you might have childcare responsibilities, elderly parents. And some people actually just say, I've worked my socks off for years, decades. I just don't even want to do it anymore. So it's helping people figure out what their version of success looks like, and if it's changed, helping them navigate that change, because it's not easy to say I need to walk away, or I need to change what I do, or I need less responsibility. So it's really supporting people navigating that change from an age perspective as well. So it's very, very varies. No 2 days are the same, which I also love.
Let's just rewind to one little thing when we're talking about security, because I've noticed this on social media, and especially on places like LinkedIn. When you type in security and you go searching, you get loads and loads of things first for cybersecurity. That's not the security we're talking about here, is it?
No. It's work within the cybersecurity space. So we're talking about the physical security. So the guarding operations, we're talking about the systems side of things, we're talking about intelligence, and really the business services side of it, rather than the tech, cyber world, AI world, which is all very interesting. But I'm not a techie person. I'm very much a people person. So I enjoy working with people rather than the cyber stuff.
Well, I guess they would call it social security, but then that's got a different meaning as well, hasn't it? So.
Oh, yes.
No, and I think it's important that, like I said, the comment I had made to me the other day was with all due respect. It wasn't respectful at all, what was said, given the fact that I'd had a conversation about changes. As you know, in the security sector, there's a lot of not very good things that go on, and there's training that isn't very good, and there's a lot of changes going on. And I was approached by somebody to be part of something that they're creating, but they asked me to come in on it because they said, you've got that education background to be able to execute the things that I want executed. I can't do that stuff. And so I was trying to say to this person about why standards are really important, why they were talking about training and saying that there was a lot of bad out there, and about awarding bodies. And I said, that's fine, but getting rid of that isn't actually an option, because you need to change that. Getting rid of something because that isn't working, that's not a solution to something. And, to bring about that change, it won't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight, as you know, as you've seen. Nothing happens overnight, particularly when things are on a broader scale. But I was trying to get across the point. You know, he said, with all due respect, you haven't done this or that? And I thought, well, you don't actually know what I've done. You also don't know that I have worked in prisons. I did my teacher training in a prison. I've taught prison officers. I've worked a lot. I'm not saying that I'm that, but please have respect for me enough to know that actually I have said that I would do my SIA qualification. I have said that I would sit in. You know me, Graham, I go out and I will live in that world for a bit, if you see what I mean, as much as I can, because I think it is important not to be in it. So I think it's important, like you said, no, cybersecurity isn't your thing, because it's not your thing, and you've got to have some kind of understanding of the pressures that people are in those sectors. Like, I've worked in the care sector, so I know the pressures that people are under, which would be completely different, some the same, but many that would be very similar to the insecurity, but very different maybe than cybersecurity.
Yeah, and you know, you hit the nail on the head there. So your expertise is your expertise. So could I coach and mentor someone within cybersecurity? Absolutely, because I'm not working with them day in, day out on the technical details of their job. So, you know, this is the same as yourself. You're putting together training and learning and development in a different way.
Yeah.
You know, and you're putting that across to someone who may not have learned in that particular style before. The subject matter is something that you will work with and immerse yourself in before you deliver it. But
as you said, you've got to know that you want to, and if it's not your thing,
then
it's not necessarily your thing. And I think it's actually really I think even we talked earlier about being a female in quite a male-dominated sector. I have to say my experience is probably very much like yours, but I think it's probably the approach we take to it. I honestly think it's the approach that we've taken to it, is seeing the person and what their needs are. And
yes. Yeah. And I think people tell you it's a male-dominated environment, so you know that's it. That's a seed planted in your mind. Then, I'm a female in a male-dominated environment. If you just go into it as a person, an individual, and work. I mean, I remember when I first got my very first operations manager's job, and I was 26 or 27. And somebody said to me, because at the time they were, you know, it was a bit of an aging workforce in the area of the responsibility that I had, and someone said to me, what makes you think that somebody is going to listen to you when when it's a group of people who are basically, paraphrasing now, but basically old enough to be your dad? So you've got like this big gang of your dad
age and
yeah. So I thought, wow, okay, well, and my response to that was, well, I'm not treating it as I'm going in to manage a load of people who are just like me dad. I'm going in to work alongside people and support them and, you know, give them what they need. So I never ever thought of it like that in my mind. It's the opinions and the conditioning of other people who then try and project that onto you. And I think, you know, as long as you're comfortable and firm in who you are as an individual, you just can't let that penetrate you. This is the wider opinion of certain sectors of the industry.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Somebody talked, it was an NLP practitioner spoke. He's black, and he said that within his community, I think it was, he said he'd always been brought up with people saying you can't do that because you're black and people will view you different, that they won't give you a chance. And he said, I basically pushed that back onto them and said, if that's the belief you hold, that's the belief you're going to go with. And we had a really interesting conversation, and he said how wonderful it was because I said, sometimes I wouldn't feel confident to be able to have those conversations with somebody that had brought that up, because often I've had, well, what would you know? You're white. And I'm like, but it's not about that. Actually, it was really wonderful to hear somebody saying it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy potentially. And it's the same with that, with the female thing. And you're like, but I'm just trying to do a job. I taught in a prison. I taught some were sex offenders, and the people on my course said, I couldn't do that. And they gave various reasons why. And I said, well, it's lucky I'm doing it, not you, because I'm going in there to do a job. I'm not there to judge them. That's not what I'm there for. That I'll leave the judge to do that. I am here to go and teach them. And that's why I'm going in to do it. And I think if you go with too many sort of preconceived ideas, but as we said about being a female, you would talk yourself out of it.
Yeah,
and what some people
why we do the jobs we do, because we're here to challenge those limiting beliefs. Because if we don't do the challenging, we won't grow as individuals. And you know, both of our roles involve allowing and helping people to grow and develop and succeed. So you know, without that challenging of the limits and beliefs, you're not going to get very far, really. But sadly, it is a thing, and it's not just security. You know, there's lots of it that goes on everywhere, really. But yeah, it's just interesting that it does crop up like that from time to time.
I think if you do it, sorry.
Well, I think these things happen because, and I'm going to quote a bit of French philosopher now, but back in 1957, Roland Barthes released his great book, Mythologies, which is all about what was then modern mythologies. But I think, like, we perpetuate these mythologies into every sector. And going back to what Marianne said, that, you know, someone said, well, with all due respect, the thing is that it's really healthy for us to get different opinions and viewpoints into each sector as well, from people that don't sit in those sectors necessarily as well. I think it's the meeting of people across sectors that's really fundamental for taking any sector forward, right? If one sector always just sits with people that have always been in that sector, it will never see the opportunities outside of that sector. And these sectors live by their own myths. I bet you could, if we really pushed you on it, Leanne, you could probably tell us 101 myths that exist within the security sector, but that they're myths, that people have hung on to these ideas or have, you know, given a narrative around these ideas forever and a day, but actually they're not what's really going on in the sector. And sometimes we need people to come into where we're at with a completely different, fresh pair of eyes, but who have expertise and knowledge in different areas as well.
And be willing to have their mind open, because, you know, you don't wake up and just necessarily become one thing. You know, I spoke to, you know, Eileen, that's in the group, and it was really interesting. For me, it was a breath of fresh air, because there's times I have crisis of like identity or whatever you might call it, I don't know, because it will take, somebody may make a comment and you go, oh God, you know. She was talking about her journey, and it was really lovely for me to hear that she'd started off in education, kind of fell into sort of the events world, and the explosion it had done for her. That's not a good word to use, is it, when you're talking about events there? But it completely brought up so many opportunities for her. But actually, when you looked at what she was doing, being the, what's it called? Safety and security officer. Actually, when I started looking at those skills, the skills that she had that she'd been using from the education bit, and she worked in childcare, she was actually able to transfer across to that, actually into a world where people were like, don't worry, just do it this way. And she's like, no, there's standards you've got to adhere to, and it's got to be like this, and that organisation. So for me, it was a really great conversation to have, to see that just because you come from one point of view doesn't mean to say you can't bring those skills. You can't bring those skills into it. But one thing I've noticed with the talking about sort of the men and women and that divide, and I know there was a lot of work talk. Did you go to the event in Birmingham for the women in?
I didn't. No, I couldn't make that one. Yeah, did you go?
Yeah, I did. I didn't know anyone. I was a baptism of fire, so I patted myself on the back. But there was a lot around those events and the women and the International Women's Day, the good of that, whether it's good, whether it adds a divide or not. And a really interesting perspective from my son is that he's always seen me work. You know, I went back to work when my eldest was 3 months old. you were talking about the factory work and the juggling and the guilt, all that kind of stuff. And my youngest said to me, when we have the International Women's Day, we then do like a science project things when he was at primary school. And he said they kept talking about women doing that, and they kept giving them a chance to do things and not us. And he said, but that didn't seem fair. And I thought, if we're not careful, we're making something of something that we're moving away from. I don't know if this makes sense. Yeah. What he was saying was that why were they giving them more of an opportunity? And of course I had to try and say, well, historically it was that women blah, 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 blah. But he really highlighted a good point, because also the youth club, they have 2 nights a week, they have youth club for girls and boys. And then they were given some money and they put an extra night on for girls. And he said, well, we've only got 1 night now, which I get, because the reason the girls had the other night was because they needed it quiet and calm away from the boys. Well, for a start, you're then assuming that all the boys are behaving that way. But when are they actually able to be boys? They didn't have a night that they could. So it's really been quite an interesting thing. Some of the things that he comes out with, I really do sort of like go, that's really interesting that he's saying this, that if we're trying to say that we're going to be equal.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand like the reason behind a decision like that, because on the surface that doesn't seem to make sense to me, because our children are now growing up with that. I would like to hope more equality in the world and to have those opportunities for all. However, we do know in certain areas like sports that there are less opportunities still for girls coming through. So you would think investment would be made in those type of areas, and I can understand why. But I think if there are questions from children, well, why do we need to?
It was interesting. I feel like if it was because the girls needed that safe space, the question needed to be asked, maybe boys need that safe space as well. And actually, maybe it would have been better to have had 1 mixed night and then 1 for girls and 1 for boys. And then we're getting all of it, because actually the boys still were feeling like, well, we're being told off essentially for being us. Can't we have a space where we can be us? But that was never, ever discussed.
It is a massive conversation.
Having 2 boys, I see it, that they see the other side of it of quite a lot. And I know I'll probably get backlash from this, but I just think we've got, because the Manosphere, I've not watched it yet. I think we're not careful. We don't see that there's a lot of males out there doing a lot of really good things. And Leanne, I'm sure you work with them, that actually they come to you because they actually want to be better, whatever better looks like.
Yes, and actually I've had so many interesting conversations after the Manosphere documentary, which I have watched with interest because it was blowing up everywhere. But what I would like to say is that in my corporate career, there were a lot of male allies, and without that allyship, I would not have been able to climb where I did. That I was fully supported by peers, by line management and the wider management community and team. There were, like I say, it's a male-dominated environment, but you know, there's great women who work there and great men who support those great women as well. So I just want to make that clear, because I think that's important. But also working with clients individually who've also watched this Manosphere documentary, they're just open-mouthed at what they're seeing, because it's a world away. And I think whether it's a male-female thing, I don't know, but there's definitely this underlying reduction of respect just in the way people are spoken to, rather than it being a male-female thing. There's just a massive gap in respect now to where things used to be. But what was also interesting, and I did see some great commentary on LinkedIn about it, was that women are still being blamed for that Manosphere. So we've got the guys in it were all brought up by a single mother parent. I think one of them had met his dad but hadn't been in his life and stuff. But it seems to be that the narrative was shifted onto, oh, look at how these guys are turning out because they're being raised by single mothers without a dad present. So I want to flip the script on that and say, where's the deadbeat dads? Why aren't they getting blamed? Why is it the woman getting blamed? But again, I don't want to turn that into a man versus woman thing. However,
it's a discussion. Yeah, but it is. it's a discussion though, isn't it? It's I think it can be I often steer away from these conversations, not because I'm not one to steer away from conversations, but purely because I think when people have got an agenda of how they want it to be. I mean, Graham knows, I last year, I can't remember when it is actually, but there's International Men's Day, which people say, oh God, they've done one for men. And I go, well, they have, and that's it. And I celebrated all of the wonderful men in my life. And I have to say, there's probably more men that have consistently supported me than females, if I'm honest. And I'm going to celebrate that every day of the week. I'm going to celebrate that because I think if we're not careful, we kind of create that idea that men are awful, and they're not. Some men are, some women are as well. But actually, as you say, I am going to celebrate those wonderful men, because if we're not careful, we potentially might get a picture painted that is, like I said, I've got two fantastic boys that I bought. Don't get me wrong, they can be a pain in the backside as well. But, I've taught mine, they can to message me on WhatsApp if they want to, if they've got problems. My eldest has just gone to the Mobos. He's just gone up to Manchester and he's not very well. And he said to me last night, I really am worried I'm not getting better. He said, do you think I'm going to be okay? And I just think it's really wonderful that he, at nearly 18, is still happy to call me mummy as well. He will still say that in front of his friends. And I do take pride in knowing that that's because I've challenged anything that they may say that could potentially seem disrespectful. He likes rap music. And even actually one we were listening to this morning had swearing in it. And I looked and he said, do you swear? I said, I know, but I'm just not really comfortable about some of the way that, he said, yeah, but if you listen to that rap music, he said, there is bad in it, but there's also some brilliant stuff that's like poetry, but also will really get a message out there that's, really, really good.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know, we just have to be really careful. Those programs, sometimes I think they do whip things up.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in the good way.
Yeah, but it's really a great conversation for men and women to have about their thoughts and opinions on.
Yeah, definitely.
I found it to be the same theme. It's about respect at the end of the day, and all we can do as parents is bring our children up to be respectful, lovely human beings, and go on and live the life in that way, really. But I'm sure it was heavily edited, and actually, one of the guys who was the main guy in that documentary, he had one of his little colleagues following him around with a live streaming thing every time he was with Louis Theroux, and he did say, look, Louis Theroux's going to go away and edit this to whichever way he wants to show it. I don't need to do that. I'm live streaming, so you can just see it all as it is, which I'm not saying that's a good thing, because he still came across really badly, but he was saying, I'm unfiltered, I'm unedited, and I wish we could be unfiltered and unedited, but with a great level of respect and tolerance for each other.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems now, isn't it? And Graham, you do a lot of work, a lot of conversations with people. I've even fallen foul to doing this recently, and I've kind of given my head a wobble, but also knowing that I'm open to hearing and having discussions about things. The problem you've often got is you only have to sort of like verbalize something, and then you're jumped on for it. And it's a scary place to be. I think particularly when you've got your own business, in all honesty, because somebody can come and do a lot of damage to you by jumping on something that never was meant in that way.
Yeah.
Well, we live in a time now when, actually not having a distinct view and not being almost at the extreme end of the spectrum doesn't necessarily do us any favors in terms of visibility. So, and that's why probably we will see such polaric extremes now, right? Because their news, their views, that's the kind of fodder that people want to see. Somebody turning up and going, I want to understand, I want to understand other people. I want to understand other people's view of the world. Unless you're someone like Louis, and you can make these documentaries, and you can sit in that kind of middle ground. right? But even then, the subject matters that he's going to pick are going to be the extreme people, so that he's kind of sitting in the middle of that. But nobody really wants to see a documentary on, here's people that are trying to, balance life and give a viewpoint for everybody. Nobody wants to see that, you see, because that's not sensational. That's not something where you can.
If they did a documentary on what you do, Leanne, they're not going to pick. They're going to pick the extreme because it's, I guess, it's that psychology, isn't it? It's the, I know I lost my dad to suicide 24 years ago, and it's interesting because I remember like a day after thinking, what am I supposed to do now? I don't know how this works. I studied this. I did this in my degree, and now it's not just something on paper. It's something here. But people do like sensationalism, don't they? Whichever way round we look at it, they do. When I told people I worked in a prison, even now when I say, they go, "Oh, really, like this?" And I go, "Oh, yeah." It's not really,
It's that step further, isn't it? And then I think we're reaching a bit of a dichotomy. So we've got, as business owners, as people, predominantly I work online, so as someone in an online space, and even the social media people who have just featured in Louis Theroux's documentary, that they're in a space where you need to be noticed, otherwise you don't get business. You're told don't be vanilla, because nobody will go for the vanilla. You need to stand out. There needs to be an element of thought leadership. You've got to have an authentic voice. You've got to be congruent to that voice, but you do have to stand out in some way. But the minute you do, you are then piled on, and then you've got this cancel culture that exists now. So it's a tricky line to follow in how you still are visible, and how you can still get an authentic message across in the right way, and give opinions and thoughts in a respectful way without still having that pile on.
It's interesting, particularly for people that have. I think you get some people that go into doing what they do and they want to go to the top. So they may have, studied or done whatever. And there's other people that sort of like accidentally, and I say that in the nicest possible way, have sort of made it. I was reading, somebody put a post out and they were talking about how to appear on social media. It's whether we like it or not. Some people don't have to, but some people do have to, if you see what I mean. And this person said about, do you think you can, I think it was something about being an introvert and about being seen. And I said, I think before you do anything, you be wise to sit. I've just created a little program actually off the back of it, because of people talking about males again struggling to do presentations because of, and in the security sector, knowing who I am. Like, you can know who you are, but also it's about who am I? Who am I in the world that I'm working with? Who do I want to be in the world that I'm working with? How comfortable do I be? How comfortable do I feel being that version? And so it's all of those things that come into play that probably nobody's ever done anything with. I know as a teacher, I'd be one thing when I was in the classroom. Then I did freelancing. Then I got diagnosed with ADHD, and I went, I could just be me. Oh, wow. And so I stopped working for anybody else. So I just worked for me. And I do wonder then I think that's why I said to you, and like you said, I think when males come forward, it's because they're like, particularly in the security sector, from my understanding, and you know more about this probably, what I'm seeing is, if in a male world, as in the males in that world, to step out and be different, which could be your normal, if that makes sense. That's a really difficult thing to do, because particularly if you're an introvert, you've got to try and be different whilst you're not wanting to be loud different. And I also say to people, you don't have to be loud in order to be seen to be different. It just might take you a bit longer to get there, because you've got to educate, and you've got to, as we were talking about, Graham, get trust. So it might not take as long. It might take longer. I don't know what your thoughts on that with the men that you've worked with, and females, I guess. Yeah.
So I just think that, as an introvert, you can absolutely be successful and deliver fantastic presentations. I think it also depends who you're working with, and it comes back to that alignment piece with the organisation that you're aligned to, or working for yourself if that's what you feel more aligned to. So I've sat around the boardroom table with absolute whoppers, and I've thought, I do not want to come in this room again and sit with you, because I'm just not in that same. Leave that behind, thank you, and don't put myself in that space, in which case that's a personal decision and you need to make a change. So if you're pushing against that door as an introvert and you're working with a load of extroverts, firstly you've got to ask yourself, is this the space for me? You know, find something that you're more culturally aligned to. I think in terms of men, the biggest thing that I do see and hear from clients is the ego. So what we need to do is work out what part the ego is playing in that situation, because if they're sitting around with a load of other egos, that's going to destroy their mental health potentially. If they're sitting around with a group of people who are quite the opposite, the ego still might be at play, but in a very different way. So we have to have a look at that identity and who are you as a person, and who are you comfortable with being? Because if you're not, if you know you're an introvert and you can't really cope with it, we need to understand and dig below the layers and find out why. If you're standing in your truth, your power, and saying, I'm an introvert, I don't like these scenarios, but I will go and do it for my job, and because I know I'm bloody good at doing it, they go off and do it, and they're really confident, and they'll deliver and achieve a great result. So it's just about getting someone confident, removing the ego layers, and finding out who they are as a person, and then saying, right, what rooms are you aligned to? Where do we put you? Or do you need to go out on your own and be absolutely fantastic as a person on your own? So it's just about stripping that right back.
Quick question there. Is it ego or is it bravado?
Both. Well, I would say ego first, because we operate from an ego state. So I know that men will take that ego home, and you know, the laptop will go on, they'll be on the laptop till 11 o'clock at night. That's got nothing to do with bravado. Bravado will present itself in the boardroom, but it's the ego that's still sitting there at 11 o'clock at night when everyone else is at home, because they don't want to be seen to be a failure, and they don't want to be seen to be underachieving compared to peers.
Interesting. Some might argue that that goes back to survivalist instinct, you know, that maybe they just feel like they just need to always be working because they're protecting their cave, you know.
Well, also, I think now more than ever, there's the idea that if you're not giving more and more and more, then you're not, well, I think there's a I think a lot of that is what we put on ourselves. But equally, I then see maybe people that have reached the top, whatever the top is, that then will be saying other people shouldn't be doing that. But then they've probably gone through that process. But also depending on where you're at, like we were just saying earlier, people, like you said, people said, oh, how's your little business? Or people say to me, how's business? And I look at them and I think, I don't know what you want me to say back to that, because it's probably just a pleasantry. But in terms of, as you said, you switch off when you need to. You're saying, you know, if you've got to get your kids or whatever, but actually they don't see the other side of it, that you keep going and giving because you have to, because you'll have it, you know, you've got to get that work done, but you just do it at different time. But I can see, Graham, I think for men there's still probably that pressure of providing, and that you've got to, you know, keep giving because somebody might be on your back for it as well.
And for me, I always wonder, is it a male female thing? I mean, I think I've probably seen it more in male behavior than women, but then is that because of, you know, the disparity in roles over the years? Is that mainly the reason why I'm seeing that? Is it, if we gave women the same opportunity as men, would we not see it in women? I think possibly we would. I think
isn't there the thought that women have to give more? I've had many business coaches say that females that they've asked to work with me, but said, can I be really clear about a few things in terms of, like, are you going to get them to do things they don't need to do? And I said, no, I will get them to do what they need to do to get where they want to get, because they said they've had to give far more because they are females. Do you
but
see
I think
that?
part of it, though, it comes back down to that, why have we always pushed, International Women's Day rather than pushing, International Men's Day? And it's because there has been disparity there since the beginning of time. We have not paid women as much as we paid men. We have not promoted women into the same positions as we have men. There's still a disparity there, and we see it in lots of different areas of society. Even I get it with when I'm doing the music podcast. Women are still under represented in music compared with men, right? In terms of like the top positions, in terms of the contracts and everything else. There's still an inequality there, and because there's an inequality there, I think that you'll have all of those other conversations will land because of that. If people were equal, maybe that we don't know, do we? That's the point. We don't know whether people would react differently in that situation if things were equal, because they're not equal.
Can we ever be equal, though? Arguably, I mean, Sam was going to the Mogos tonight, and we had a conversation about that. And he said one of the rappers that he really likes, he said, well, I don't understand why he's involved because he's white. So we then had a long discussion about that. And I said, well, do some research about it, find out. And he said it was because of the involvement he'd had in black music. And I thought how wonderful that was, and how actually it comes along with what we were saying about Leanne, you being brought into stereotypically a male world, probably then supporting males as a female in a male world. I think it's wonderful. I think it's really, really good to actually celebrate the fact that we can all bring our difference. We can all bring who we are to that. Do you see what I mean? Like, yeah. You're a female, men are actually asking to work with you, when arguably one might have thought that you would have had, you know what I mean, from females.
I think it's really, really hard, don't you? That like the whole equality piece, I think is so difficult, because I think what tends to happen is as you move the needle for one group of people to be more included, you probably will get another group of people going, now you're excluding me. It never ever sits comfortably that everybody's included. Never. It's all about trying to create balance in that, as opposed to, and I don't think you ever quite 100% get there. I think you just have to keep trying. You just have to keep trying.
What you said before, Graham, about, do men work hard and late into the night because they've got this sort of caveman protective instinct? I'm not really sure about that, because we've got I think the reason why men come to me as well is because I'm quite clear with boundaries now. So my business, I can't be all over the world, all over jetting here, there and everywhere, down on trains to London. I'm a single parent. I have specific hours that I need to be around for, and therefore my boundaries have to be communicated really clearly in terms of communication. I'm available to work when I'm not, and I'm really strict on that. And I think people are quite attracted to that in a weird way, because it flies in the face of the norm. And then I also talk about nervous system regulation, which again is as far removed as possible from that caveman, let's work all hours into the night instinct. So I think about 2 or 3 years ago, if I just said to most men, it's a stereotypical thing to say, but if I just said to most men, let's do some work on your nervous system regulation, they probably would have looked at me and gone, oh, what is that? No, don't speak to me about that. Whereas now it's like, oh, okay, tell me more about that. How can we work with that? What do we need to do? So things are changing. And I think but in this, like, I heard someone call it like an Amazon Prime world, where everything has to be instant, everything has to be now. And people are turning away from that. Yeah, they're starting to turn away from that.
But ultimately, are men just more selfish than women?
Well, you tell me, Graham. You are one, and I'm not.
I do think that men. I genuinely think if you approach men in a, is what you did a session just earlier. I think if you approach men in a kind way, and you approach them with where they're at as well, so you find out where they're at. Yeah. I think from my experiences, I've had a lot more success with that. And so in terms of, like you were saying, with the the work you've done, like nervous system regulation, that kind of thing. When I was teaching the prison, it was interesting because the flip was the other way. There was most females, I think it was 30% prison officers are female. One of the prison officers, she did her micro teach on perimenopause. So she did a session on that. She was quite passionate about it. And the men were really interested. They actually said, we then went back to well, she was the education manager, to say, I said, she's really, really good at this. Could she use what she's learned with me in terms of, arguably it was supposed to be used for, like with the prison officers, with the prisoners. Could she put workshops on? Because the men are really interested in learning about this. Nothing to do with their job because they were working with males, because it was a male prison, but they were really interested because they said, we want to be able to understand our wives, our girlfriends, our mums better. And they really wanted to. So I think if, as you said, there is a lot more curiosity. I think it's about curiosity. But as you said, Graham, in the session you did earlier, if you sell something to somebody in a way that.
But I'd also keep part of my mind on why do they want to know how to, how to treat women better, and is it because they want to get an easier life out of it, or they want a better? Well, I'm just saying, just asking the question, right? Because
it could be, but don't we all want an easy life?
I know, but I'm going to be controversial. I'm going to throw this out there, because the other thing as well is that, if I have conversations with like men around, this whole piece about, well, you need to look after yourself first, and then you can look after others, which is a rhetoric that's out there now, right, in society. You look after yourself first, and you look at. With men, it seems to be more of, don't push back on this, but this is true. With men, it seems to be like, well, yeah, the wife will understand if I need to go to gym at 5 o'clock in the morning, because she knows that I need to look after me so that I can look after the family, right? Now, with women, it seems that women would communicate that more. In other words, how does this me going to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning impact everybody in the house, right? With the men, it seems to like, well, it's everybody understands that I need to do that, right? There seems to be a difference in that narrative.
That's where I see when you have someone like you, Leanne, in that equation, and I've experienced a fair bit with. When I've seen males that have approached me in terms of coaching, they haven't tried to understand where I'm at in any shape or form. I'm not saying that's everyone. I'm absolutely not saying that it is, but particularly I've talked about the neurodiversity stuff, about how you can improve things, what things you can use to improve. And I've said, but you're saying to me to do things that I'm just not going to be able to do because of my lifestyle, because there's other people in my life. I can't control them. That's not me saying but I literally can't pull them down and go, mummy needs this. So I think that's where it's important having someone like you, Leanne, because at the end of the day, I'm not saying men don't understand, because Graham, I know you've got kids, you're the one that, takes the kids to school, picks them up, and it's brilliant. But I think having someone like Leanne, or somebody that absolutely gets that, you will understand then when you're working with somebody, whether it's male or female, to be quite honest, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
That you've got to understand, you would be understanding probably more about where they're coming from. And like you say, Graham, I've seen a lot of it where people are doing silly things at silly times of the morning, and you're like, I'm there going, yeah, right, whatever. Because actually, I see it in the gym. I go to the gym. I try to go at 6, not because I love it, but because it starts my day off here well. Do you know what? I look around that gym, it's mostly men in there. And evenings, just around tea time, it's mostly men in there. And it's a really interesting one, because I just think there's got to be children around here somewhere.
Yeah.
And I still think there is this idea that women will then cram in. I know I'm guilty. I'm just, not now, my kids are older, I'm just going to nip to the gym. I'm just going to nip to the gym.
Yeah.
And how often have I used the sauna and jacuzzi, even now?
So on that basis, it's not really controversial what you've said, Graham, and it's a regular thing. So in a conversation earlier this week, I had with a female business owner. So she has a business and her husband's employed. So her husband has to travel with his job and stuff, like sporadically, she doesn't really have to. But there are occasions where she might need an early call, or she might need to go somewhere, and they have a fantastic marriage. So they're, you know, they're equal in terms of as much equality you can have in a relationship. However, he will not seek permission if he needs to go to, you know, hop on a flight over to Berlin or whatever for work. He doesn't say to her, oh, is it okay on Wednesday if I need to leave the house at 5 a.m? Whereas she does do that in that sense. And that's, you know, it's just that the role, the fluidity of the role, and, you know, going back to conditioning for many, many years, it is that thing. And the language you've just used there then, Marianne, is like, I'm just going to nip to the gym. I'm going to go to the gym for 90 minutes because that's how long I'll be there for. You know,
the crazy thing is my husband had never, like, he worked away, so I was on my own a big chunk of the week. And actually he would probably be more like child focused than me. I'm a great mum, don't get me wrong, but I'm like, if I want to go out, I still will. So it wasn't anything even to do with him. He'd be like, go out and buy yourself something, and I'd be like, oh, I know, but I feel, you know, I don't work as many hours, and he's like, it doesn't matter. So it must be something really deep rooted in there. Or
like, it is. And that's not to say, oh, women are terrible for minimising their own needs and time. And it's not terrible to say a man will just go and do whatever they need to do. Neither of those is wrong. What needs to be happening is to have that conversation and to have that communication and to not assume those roles.
I think in that respect, you know, I think that the narrative of men, and it is a generalization and it is a kind of a stereotype to some extent, but the narrative of men is more selfish than women. Full stop. Simple as.
I think there's a lot women could learn a lot, because when I do the micro teaches, invariably I'll say, okay, do your micro teach on whatever you want, do it on work if you want, or on something you're interested in. And 9 times out of 10, the men will go, yeah, golf, football, whatever it might be, and the women will go, I haven't got any interests. So often it will be that they've had children. But what I will say is that I think women could learn a lot from men in that they will have those boundaries. How many men will organise a night out, and they will organise it in advance, and they will say, we are going to get together. But equally, I've said, I think it's because women, I've always said, if I'm going to have a night out, I say to my husband, is it okay, but not permission, more of a, are you going to be around? Because I'm going to go out on that night. He'd say yes. The issue I've found is that other women don't do that. So it never ends up happening, whereas men will tend to put those in. And I think a lot of that comes from, unfortunately, I've been at work all week. I need that downtime. And I think historically women didn't work full time or didn't work at all. Then it becomes blurred because you're like, hang on a minute, I've been working and I've had the kids. And now I'm like, can I have a night out or not?
We told you before you started, Leanne, that this conversation could go anywhere. And that hasn't just...
yeah, definitely. And also what I want to say is that men who I work with, they are not selfish. I would not call them as I mean, don't get me wrong, the 1 or 2 comments, sometimes I have to say, oh, let me pick you up on that. Let me just reflect back what you've said. But on the whole, men worry about the impact that their work is having on their relationship, that they're not around enough for their children, you know, going back to the who am I?
Yeah. But perhaps the ones you work with are the ones that have got the emotional intelligence to realise that they need to work on themselves.
Do they seek you out to get help?
So I think, you know, you're absolutely right, Graham. I think the guys who sit with the ego and you know, don't have that self-awareness, they're never going to reach out to me in a million years, because they, you know, like the conversation to yourself, Marianne, like, why, with all due respect, why do I need you? What are you good? So it's you will always encounter people like that. But I don't want to work with those people anyway.
Horrible, stinky people.
No, I think that, Graham, we've talked in the past, even about in relationships, that I think there's intentional selfish, but also, if you want to call it, unintentional. Because we talked about how men are about relationships, even in terms of like historically, when I look back when I was younger, that, you know, say you had a breakup, a woman will speak to their friends, cry, deal with it, blah, 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 blah. Men will tend to, you know, and having studied psychology, it will tend to, not all, to carry on with everything as if like everything's fine, and when in actual fact then 6 months later it's like, oh, actually, things aren't fine whatsoever. But we had a discussion about this once, Graham, and how I think men just will be seemingly selfish, but it's just the way their mind works. And so even the whole nag thing, it's like, well, a woman isn't nagging necessarily, it's just that she needs to process it now. I need to process this now, or I need this done now. Whereas for man, they don't, and biologically there's certain parts of the brain that are different. But just that, I think you always talk about it, and I'm sure you and Leanne, it's about having those conversations though, isn't it? Like you've said, that if you approach a male in a way that, like you were saying, oh, hang on a minute, can I just challenge you over that? But can we discuss where that comes from? Because I think, again, as a male friend told me once, as soon as a man feels like you're attacking him, he will just shut down completely. Whereas if you approach them from a different point of view, you're likely to get them on board. But as soon as they feel like, which is why often counselling doesn't work, because if it's somebody else's idea, they won't buy into it. Whereas if they've come to that, then they will buy into that. So that I've got a friend that I learn a lot about male psychology from, and I'm like, that helps me get an easier life.
Absolutely.
I think it's about meeting people where they're at as
Absolutely.
well. And some people have great self-awareness. Some people say, I'm coming to you because I wish to explore
Which
what
is
that
great.
might look for me. But yeah, you've got to go back to where they are, and or I keep saying it, but goes back to that identity piece and who are they as a person, because a lot of people don't know that. One of the first things I ask people is, who are you?
Yeah.
And generally they will say, oh, my name is Joe Bloggs and this is my job title. That's not who they are, So we're not allowed
that comes from in that corporate world, about what I was saying about somebody was saying to me about having to give a presentation, and they said, I was older, more experienced. They'd spoken to me and learned a lot from me, actually. They said that they learned a lot from me about how to show up as them in a world that they were like, oh, I want to be this, but nobody else is being that, and they've got the confidence to do it. That it's hard. Do you think it is harder for women? I don't know. What do you tend to find? Because you've got challenges, haven't you? You've got women that are arguably in a male world, then trying to be themselves, but you've got men in a male world also trying to not be that stereotypical male, which is
so probably the best way of putting this is if you're advertising for a position and there are 5 essential criteria, then the man, say they both got 3, man's got 3, woman's got 3, the woman will not apply for that position because she'll think she's inexperienced and hold herself back. Say, right, I'm not doing it. The man will just tick all the boxes and say, I'll worry about the other 2 when they happen. Let me just go for it first. And that's quite typical of what I see, where you've got this male energy, which is quite driven and forward, but then they're successful, they get the position, and then it's like, oh, okay, what do I do now? I've got nowhere to turn. That's where they need help. Whereas the female will just hold themselves back and just take that opportunity completely away from themselves, really. So we've got,
there would be more females out there if they gave themselves.
If they do that,
I was reading about this the other day. And it was a really interesting. That was so interesting that they talked themselves out of it. So arguably, it isn't that women aren't given the chance; they're almost not giving themselves the chance.
Yes, and both of those lead to a confidence issue. So you've got a confidence because you're just bypassing all of these opportunities of your own doing, and then it snowballs and snowballs. The more it happens, the more evidence you give yourself that you're not worthy and capable of that.
There's a lot of work being done on this though at the moment around 2 things. One is the whole thing around job adverts. The job adverts are overly spec'd in terms of what you actually need to have in order to do the job, because the perfect person doesn't exist that actually fulfills all of those criteria. They just don't exist, right? Companies, companies are just like going, this is like super person that we're applying for here. They've literally got all of these accolades. right to the hilt and whatever, and they just do not exist, right? There's not even anyone in the company at the moment that's got all of that, but we just thought we'd put it all out there anyway. So there's that. But then there's also a whole piece that people are beginning to realize, that job titles, which hold a lot of sort of baggage with them, they need to be broken down, and actually they're not helpful either, you know, in that there's a lot of people that apply for a role, and then there's a whole lot of expectation that goes on that particular kind of role. And it might be that, again, that person's actually not great at everything that would always go with that role. And wouldn't it be better if actually we start employing people because of what they're good at, and then, you know, finding where the gaps are, employing someone else over here that's good at the bits that they're not good at, and putting those things together, instead of trying to make up these super roles and expecting people to be able to fill every single gap under the sun, because they don't.
Doing it the other day. I was looking at roles and I literally put myself in the bin. I mean, I'm self-employed, but I still look around. And I think I said to you, I literally came away feeling depressed, and then feeling like I had no skills. And then I thought, and I read something, it was a video somebody put out, and they said how to use AI was actually get your CV, take all your personal details off it, anything that would, you know, and then put it in, and then get AI to tell you what roles you could go for. And I thought that would be potentially really good for women, for the reasons you're saying about, because I know I looked at these job roles, which is interesting what you're saying, and I was going, I can't do anything. I'm literally in the bin, which is ridiculous.
I wouldn't apply for anything.
It was a really good way of doing it.
I wouldn't apply for anything if it didn't have makes the tea on it.
I love that. But I am seeing lots of human job descriptions out there at the moment.
That's good.
And I know there's a big movement about companies publishing the salary itself, because of everything that's going on with shortages and cutting staff and NI increases and stuff. It's really important that, because I was working with a client who was looking for marketing roles. There were 2 head of marketing roles. Again, you know, the job description was super duper utopia person for both. One was paying something like 28k and the other one was 70. I was like, yeah, so you've got all of this confusion, which doesn't help people when they're, you know, they may be suffering from a lack of confidence, or maybe
it's complete nonsense, Leanne. Yeah. Anyway, we must leave it there, because we've hit time. That was brilliant. Thank you so much for.
Thank you so much.
Really, there's so much more that we could have even started on. I didn't even get to ask you about how these things have changed the security industry, but they pretty much have.
Taking over.
Oh yes. Well, yes, we should do that. You know, because everything's filmed these days. You know, you can't stand on a door and expect not to be filmed, and that changes the whole dynamic, etc.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leanne, for coming along. Folks, if you've been watching this today and you'd like to know more about what Leanne does, please do contact her through the links that are on and available around this podcast as it goes out. If not, just thank you for watching it one way or the other. Thank you for giving an hour of your time away. When it's very precious these days, we do appreciate it. We'll be back soon with more of the source of the sauce. But until then, from Leanne and Marianne and myself, bye for now.